Hi guys, and welcome to Samsung Now. Samsung Now is where we look at all things Samsung, all things tech, all things gaming, and anything in between. So if you're interested in either of those or all of them, please subscribe. Now, one of my avid fans, I use that term loosely, but he certainly comments a lot, is a guy by the name who goes by the moniker of Paw Paw. And he is always kind of very frequent in commenting, so hi Paw Paw. But he asked me to do I imagine it's a he, it could be a she. Okay, but he asked me to do a video as regards what's about soundbars and Atmos with soundbars and wireless 5.1 systems and things like that. Now, I do have, having said all that, I do have quite a lot of experience in terms of soundbars. I also have quite a lot of experience in terms of 5.1 systems that are wireless. And the biggest problem, well, we'll discuss the 5.1 thing first. So we've got, say, you want a system, you still want the 5.1 surround, but you do not want all the wires. And I understand that. I try and limit mine by using very, decent but very, very thin speaker wire, which allows me, and it's very flexible, allows me to hide it very easily. So there are ways and means that make having placement of speakers not too much of a problem. Certainly with you can get either very, very thin speaker cable or very, very flat. And it depends on how much you want to invest in this, of course. But there are still people out there that just want to plonk some speakers around the room and don't want any wires anywhere. And I understand why that would be, why anyone would want that. And I've tried it, I've experimented, but I've not had them for very long. I've always been very dissatisfied with it. And there are some problems that are inherent in the technology that's used that just by the simple fact of not having wires. The biggest problem with a lot of surround Bluetooth systems, and that's pretty much what they run on, either Bluetooth or a derivative of that, is lag. Now, when you've got wires set up to all the speakers, when a sound comes from front to back or back to front, it matches what you're seeing on screen. You're not seeing, a delay or anything. So you're immersed exactly with what you're seeing. And this is a very key thing with how sort of audio works with our minds and what we're watching and us being sort of immersed in that film or game for that matter. But with Bluetooth or 5.1 wireless systems there's a degree of lag between when the rear speakers are receiving the sound and even the front left and right, because they're wireless too usually, react to what's being fed to it sort of over the air, and then what's being shown on screen. So what you tend to get is like a slight delay in the sound hitting your ears from being fed to the speakers by the system and what you're seeing on screen. And this just very subtle delay can cause all manner of immersion issues, because once you start to notice it, you can't unnotice it. It's a little bit like when you're watching a movie and the sync is a little bit out. Now you can adjust them. You can adjust them as quite well, but still, for me, they're not as accurate as a wired system ever will be. A wired, it's instant, it's there, it's straight away. But you're always going to be waiting for things to catch up. And, I know it's only milliseconds, but how we perceive things in terms of the whole package of the audio and visual aspect of it It has to tie in seamlessly. If there's a slight sort of subtlety in terms of it being out, you notice it, and that drags you out of the film, and then that stops you enjoying the film so much. And that's what I've experienced with 5.1 wireless systems, and which is why, unless things dramatically change in terms of the technology used, I would find it very hard to want to move to one again. And that moves us on to the more sort of casual. We want someone that wants decent sound but doesn't want speakers at all anywhere other than at the front of their TV. And we have these, which have become hugely popular now, is you know, the Soundbars that we're seeing housed in front of TVs. And I've had quite a few of these. I've had some from Yamaha, I think it's the YPS range. I've had 3 of those. I've had one by Samsung. I've had one by Pioneer. I've also had just recently one by Q, was it Q Acoustics? I can't remember. It was a decent one. And I've heard others. I've heard the Sonos ones, and there is an inherent problem with a lot of them. Is you cannot escape. And I've had one of the YPS ones that's sort of below the top one, which cost me an absolute fortune a while ago. And the idea was it was meant to fire off sound off walls and so on. And you know, in theory, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And you do get, you know, even like with their £900 one, I think it was, and it was meant to fire it off the room. And this is quite a square room, really. It still didn't do a great job, you know, compared still to going back to the whole 5.1, sitting in front of one, a proper 5.1 setup and experiencing that, and then comparing it to the speaker thing. You know, it's still not, to me, it still just doesn't cut the mustard a lot of the time. You know, and I think that there's an awful lot of caveats with these speakers. You know, I think the key thing is do not expect 5.1 at all. You know, you're going to get better sound than you would from your TV. Yeah, that's going to happen. But you're not going to get things whizzing around you. There's even some soundbars that do Atmos now. Now, considering they're having trouble doing 5.1, I struggle to believe how they're going to manage to do Atmos effectively. And I think a lot of it is just kind of a, you know, just a ploy to get you to buy it, because soundbars are so popular these days and people don't want to mess around with speakers and so on, and placement and setup. Because, you know, there's the belief that it's difficult. You know, if you want it done properly, yeah, you have to fiddle with it, as with anything, you know, with tech. But people sort of want a one-stop thing. So they buy these boxes and they're sold, oh, this has got Atmos, this is 5.1, it bounces stuff over the, yeah. Maybe in a perfectly isolated square room that's, you know, some laboratory somewhere that Sonos or Yamaha or whoever have developed to prove that their technology works. Yeah, maybe then it works, but not in your average living room, wherever you are in the world. You're not going to get that same experience, and you're not really going to get the same Atmos experience, because trust me, if they can't do 5.1, they're not going to be able to do Atmos effectively, because Atmos, predominantly, one of the key aspects of Atmos is it relies on height, and to bounce it at the very least from the ceiling, you need to raise Atmos speakers off the ground, way off the ground. Mine are sort of a good 5 foot in the air on the stands, and that alone just gives part of the height to it, and then the rest is fed and fired from the top off the ceiling. A soundbar is going to be resting beneath your TV and aiming to shoot that sound up. So you're going to hear that sound come out the top of that unit first before it's had a chance to reflect back down to you. So that height element really isn't there. So I fail to believe that can be used effectively. Yeah, so that height element is removed if you're using a soundbar and the Atmos speakers are within the soundbar, which we're seeing quite a few of. Without that high element, you're not allowing to create that spatial element, that spatial thing, and you're getting the sound. You're going to hear the sound regardless from the Atmos speakers at the level that your TV is at. So the thing to take away from all this is what's worth doing? Well, you know, it is just a fact of, you know, if you're going to go for, if you don't want wires, if you refuse to have wires, and they can be very small or flat, but if you refuse to have that, don't go for a 5.1 wireless system because of the inherent problems with the technology and the fact that it will break that immersion when you start to see a disconnect with what you're hearing and what you're seeing and then what you hear. Your best bet is to get a 2.1 setup, which is a soundbar and a subwoofer. If you can get a subwoofer, great. You know, it really makes a world of difference because that gives you that real sort of physicality to what you're seeing on screen and gives some weight to the sound. Huge difference, huge difference. So if you can get a sub, get a sub. Make sure you get a sub. If you have to just get a soundbar on its own, make sure you get the best one you can afford to get, but with the option later to then add a soundbar. Don't just get a soundbar that doesn't accept any connection for a subwoofer, because you will, trust me, want to get a sub at some point. So invest what you can and get a 2.1, which is a sub and a soundbar, and get what you can. What you would have spent on a 5.1 system, get that for your sub and your soundbar. If you can't afford to get a sub at the same time, make sure your soundbar has an option to allow for a sub to be used with it. So that's my advice. You know, it is simple matter. You're not ever going to compete with a properly set up 5.1 or 5.2, which is Atmos, or 7.1 or 7.2 setup, which is wired. You're just not going to get that, because a wired setup is instant, it's there. The 5.1 wireless systems, they, just by their nature, just by the technology, even though it's just milliseconds, that's enough to break that disconnect with what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And that drags you straight out of the movie. You know, it's a bit like when you see the lip sync on when you're watching a film or your TV, and you're seeing somebody talking and their lips don't quite match what they're saying. Once you notice it, it never goes away. So you don't want that. You don't want to invest, and they're usually expensive, that money in that. If you don't want to have wires, don't go for a 5.1 wireless setup. Go for a 2.1 sub and speaker soundbar setup, and invest what you would have spent a lot of money on the 5.1, and then spend that same money on getting a decent sub and a very, very good soundbar. So that's my advice. I hope that helps. We've got more videos to come. Don't forget to subscribe. If you want to ask me questions, please feel free. Just, you know, say something below, and I'll always comment as much as I can. And I'll see you guys very soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.